What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I am your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset, your behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. So here we are on episode 59. Last week I was speaking with a man called John Penquith from Wales, who was telling us all about the way you can analyze data and you can predict where the market is going, what pockets of the market are going to outperform other pockets of the market. And you can do all of that using the existing data that is out there on all of the different property portals available on over the internet. So very interesting conversation. This week we are talking again about the power of the internet, and it is through my conversation with Miss Ellie McKay. Now, before I get into that, I just want to give a quick shout out to the 54 people who listened to my podcast first thing on Monday morning. And the reason I'm saying that is because I have just switched out the episode with a better version. My first one had a bit of a microphone meltdown, and so I am actually recording this a second time using the higher quality mic. And at the time of recording this, there are 54 people who have already listened to the poor version. So I hope they'll forgive me. And welcome, guys, to the episode. And I'm glad you're enjoying the podcasts as they go on. So let's get into who is Ellie McKay. Ellie and her husband, Mark, have built a pretty decent property portfolio in just the last 3 years. And let's not forget, COVID has taken up about the last 18 months. So it's about half of their portfolio building journey has been in the middle of COVID. And the reason they've been able to do so well is that they've actually used the power of LinkedIn to leverage and grow their relationships with investors. But it's not through what you might expect. You might expect the hard sell. They're out there pushing it all the time. Actually, not at all. They're far more subtle than that, and they're much more authentic. And they talk about their life, their journey, their struggles, all of that kind of stuff. And so it seems that they've picked up a huge interest in this kind of method, because they're now at 34, or certainly Ellie is at 34,000 followers on her LinkedIn. And so she has quite a powerful voice, and she's gone off and started a podcast, and they've started they have an electrical contracting business, and they also have a fire protection business. So they're a really entrepreneurial couple, and I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation with Miss Ellie McKay. Ellie McKay, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm fantastic. Thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to it.
It's good to have you on. And tell us, just whereabouts are you based today? Are you at home or in an office? Or?
Well, I'm actually working from home. I think we do have offices, but during lockdown, we acquired two very gorgeous and somewhat mischievous puppies. So I found myself working from home. We moved to a new house. I've set up my podcast studio and office from here as well. So yeah, that's where I am today in Doncaster.
I see the sign on the wall, on a mission, so it's a nice studio. We're going to get into loads of different things today. Obviously, you've got. I was going to say today is kind of an auspicious occasion. The day that we're having this podcast, you've got exactly 34,000 followers on your LinkedIn, and so that's clearly something to talk about today. But you're in the property investment sector, and you're doing a lot of those different things. So we're going to go into all of that. But first, just to kind of give the audience an idea, who is Ellie McKay? Give us the 30-second elevator pitch.
So my name's Ellie McKay. Alongside my husband Mark, we set up Combined Property, full-time property investors and developers. We do have multiple businesses. We have an electrical installation business and a fire protection business as well. But property is where my heart lies. And I'm a marketer above all else. You mentioned LinkedIn. I'm a great believer in it. It's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's who knows you. And it is definitely the market element that's helped us to get the success we've had today.
Yeah, it's great. It's so interesting to sort of hear some of the stories of how you've grown that number, because I've been on LinkedIn for years, and I consider myself to be a regular enough kind of poster of content and stuff, but I'm only at like 1/8 of what you've managed to achieve. So we're going to get into all of that, but can you just give us a little bit to start off, just a bit of the backstory, like what was it that kind of got you into the property sector?
Well, the truth is, we were in our early 20s. We were very entrepreneurial, full of life and full of energy, not much else. We sat there Googling get rich quick. What could possibly go wrong, you say? It was a toss up between stocks and shares and property won. And it was back in the days where you could buy off plan or buy a property and refinance it in the same day, which to be fair, would have been an incredible time to be involved in property. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out like that for us. We allowed ourselves to be sold a dream. We bought an off-market property, just a single apartment, but for us in our early 20s, it was a significant amount of money. And a property we bought for 125,000 became worth 60,000. So the intention was this property was going to be worth 170,000, but the development unfortunately got flooded. The build was delayed, and it wasn't completed till 2010, where we were smack bang in the middle of the recession. And yeah, we had to come up with, I think, £40,000 deficit just to be mortgageable. We were unable to walk away. We were quite happy to walk away from the money we'd already put down, which was quite a sizable amount, but contractually we were stitched up like kippers. And I've got to say, at the time, it was definitely the most stressful experience that we've went through. I pretty much had a complete, nervous breakdown as a result of it. They were going to come after our existing assets, which for clarity wasn't a great deal. As I mentioned, we were only very young and both on relatively modest salaries at the time, and we only had our current home and probably a second-hand Golf or a Ford Fiesta or something like that. But they tried to come after us for it, and it was a baptism of fire for sure. Wow. And actually, off the back of that, I became very risk averse. Was more than happy to return to the comfort and the security of a 9-to-5 and the security that provided, basically. And it wasn't until years later that we returned to property. My husband set up his electrical business in 2010, and I found it quite fascinating to see the change in him, going from a sort of employee mentality to running his own business. And on a Monday morning when the alarm went off, and I'm sort of thinking, oh God, he's sort of leaping out of bed with a spring in his step. And, on an evening, this was long before we had children, he was, happily getting the laptop out, and he was just full of enthusiasm. And I couldn't really get my head around the fact that he didn't want to watch all the mundane television with me. And it was a bit of an eye opener. And it wasn't until 2018 that I had the confidence and self-belief, I suppose, to start dabbling again. And it's been quite phenomenal, really, to think what we've achieved in such a short space of time, because we've only been doing this full time for 3 years now, and it's
three, and it's not just any 3 years. It's the last 3 years. 50% of that has been the pandemic. So you're right in the middle of it, halfway through your journey. And how have you fared? I mean, is the business is doing well, despite the pandemic and all of the disruption that's brought?
We actually had, the reality is we all know the negative sides of the pandemic, but there's been a lot of positives as well for us, not just in the business sense, but when there was a lot of trepidation in the market last year, we really capitalized on that opportunity. And actually, we sort of switched our strategy, because up until that point, we kind of operate on two bases. We do portfolio building for our clients, and we also offer fixed returns to our investors, which is probably the more preferable out of the two, because that allows us the autonomy to be able to go and build our own portfolio or do our own projects. And last year we acquired 20 properties for our own portfolio, so we just doubled down. And
wow, 20 is a good number.
Yeah, we got stuck in.
And so tell us, I mean, that really interests me, the fact that you went through that really initial baptism of fire, and you were out of it for more than, for 10 years by the sounds of it. So it's really interesting that you've come back and that you're succeeding. So you learned some lessons during that break away from it. And tell me this, I'm curious about your investors, the fixed returns. Tell us about what you're offering investors and how that all came about.
Well, you mentioned LinkedIn, and this is actually where it started for me, because I invested in property education back in 2018, which was a whole new world for me. I was complete novice to the wealth creation space. And I'd actually been made redundant while I was on maternity leave. I was a qualified careers advisor working in prisons and working for probation up until that point. And my maternity leave had ran out, and I'd actually sort of went through the humiliation of pushing my double pram into the job centre, and I was actually claiming job seekers allowance when I did my property training back in 2018. My mental health wasn't in a great place. I was struggling with quite severe postnatal depression, having crippling anxiety attacks, really struggling to leave the house. So when I walked into the doors to do the education with my husband, it was probably one of the most daunting things that I've ever done. And one of my mentors at the time said on day one, "You're a marketer first and everything else second," and that's irrelevant of your sector.
Wow,
because
that's interesting. Yeah.
If people know who you are, then you're open for business. And I appreciate there's a lot of very successful people out there without a personal brand or a high profile. But my sort of response to that is, well, can you imagine where you would be if more people knew about what you did and the support that you offered? So from we left the property training, and we actually purchased 2 properties within 4 days, no money down. Obviously, we used money, but at that point, it was joint venture partners, where we teamed up with a guy, a fighter pilot who was living out in Qatar. Typical avatar, really, someone who's cash rich, time poor, wasn't able to go out and view properties or facilitate refurbs or deal with all the sort of boots on the ground stuff. So we did that, and we profit shared 50-50 for our first couple of deals. And that's when I set up my LinkedIn profile, because there's so much power in LinkedIn. But at that point, I limited understanding of it was just basically an online CV. I had no idea of the power of the network. And of course, we didn't have any property deals to shout about. That was the reality. And we didn't want to tell any lies, but we did position ourselves as that sort of preeminent authority. And the reason I share that with people is there's quite a limiting belief for anyone that's newer to the property industry, that you do need to have a track record before you're able to raise finance. And my personal experience completely contradicted that. I found that by sharing a little bit about me, our values, our journey, what we were doing. And when I say our journey and what we were doing, I don't mean posting every time we went for a viewing. Nobody wants to see that. But sharing a little bit about the things that were important to me, like mental health, like spinning plates, sharing the lows as well as the highs. How do you go all in with your business and be a present parent? At the time when we set up the property business, my youngest, Sam, was only a few months old. So we had quite a lot of backlash from our nearest and dearest. This isn't a great time. Why don't you wait till the children are older? What about Brexit? The property market's absolutely saturated. But of course, you've just got to kind of crack on. So that's initially where it started with the LinkedIn. And we found within the first few months, before we got the keys to our first property, we'd actually raised a few £100,000 in private investment. And then in 2019, we raised £4 million just through my personal LinkedIn profile, not including the other platforms or any other connections that we made. So yeah, it was. It's been without doubt. I said that you're a marketer first, but it's been without doubt that we'd attribute our success to date to. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to sort of fund the multiple projects that we've had on the go since.
That's fantastic. Wow. It's impressive. You're based in Doncaster in the UK. I mean, do you invest in the whole of the UK, or do you stay local to Doncaster?
Yeah, I mean, we invest primarily in Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, but we've got contacts now. Again, relationships and marketing, it's what I do. So we've now got a powerful network across the UK. That's
brilliant. Yeah. And then, I mean, LinkedIn, you mentioned the power of LinkedIn. I mean, how long has it taken you to actually, you said you started your profile in 2018.
Yeah.
So the 34,000 that you're now at is just 3 years of work. I mean, which seems incredible when I consider the 4,000 I have is like 7 or 8 years of work. So, I mean, how much time are you putting into this into the effort to kind of grow your profile?
So less now, but at the time it was almost a full-time job, and I think that's probably what set me apart from everyone else, because there can be quite a lot of negativity towards LinkedIn, and I people question whether it's a proper job. You know, it was like, because my husband was more operational, he was one coordinating the project managers or the, facilitating the acquisitions or whatever else, that there was a perception, a misperception from certain people that my piece of the puzzle wasn't bringing as much value to the table. But without the millions of pounds in private investment we've raised from the LinkedIn, then there would be no operational side. And where I see people going wrong with it is they treat social media, whether it's LinkedIn or the other platforms, as a bolt-on to what they're already doing, or a bit of an inconvenience, as opposed to giving it the respect that it actually deserves and treating it as a full-time job. Because it's not the amount of time it takes you to post, it's the amount of time it takes you to understand the platform and really see what's working, what gets the engagement, what's connecting with people, because people don't want to be educated, and your more fact-based posts, they just simply don't go anywhere. They don't gain the traction. And I see the LinkedIn profile almost as a shop window. It doesn't matter how beautifully set up your shop window is. If nobody's walking past it, then no one's coming in to buy what you've got to offer.
Right.
And 80% of my content is not property specific. My strategy kind of goes against what most of your social media gurus will tell you, because it is, I call it being the lighthouse, which is where you stand bright, you shine, you let everyone know who you are and what you do, and they come towards you, as opposed to the tugboat, which is constantly expelling energy and pushing and pulling to get the exact same result.
Right. Okay. Interesting way to look at it. And I mean, in terms of your growth, I mean, has there been a particular post or, certain posts or areas that have, suddenly gone viral for you, and you got a huge sort of input from that? I mean, I remember back in 2019, I posted a video on LinkedIn, and it was really just a bit of fun. It wasn't supposed to be anything in particular, but in the space of about 5 days, I had 150,000 views on it, and like hundreds and hundreds of comments. And it was the first time I'd ever had anything go viral. And naturally, you pick up a lot of contact connections and stuff like that from that. But I remember thinking, God, I have to reply to all of these comments, because you should like engage with the commentary. And it was hundreds. I mean, every time I checked my phone, there would be another 25 comments. I mean, do you engage with, obviously with 34,000 connections now, you must have huge engagement. Do you have time to kind of connect with the people, or do you have a team that are helping you do that, or how do you structure it?
I have a team member who manages my inbox, but very interesting. Up until this point, I personally tried to reply to as many messages as is possible. But as we're growing all of the businesses, and it's becoming less and less practical to be able to do that. So I am going to need to look at outsourcing it, but I will always keep my hand in, and I will always look at who's engaging with my content. And if there's certain names that continue to crop up, I do make a point of reaching out and making sure that you do have that connection, especially for if somebody just puts great posts, then that's fine. But if somebody takes the time to give you an in-depth response, or it's evoked some sort of emotion in them, then I feel like that it's only respectful to give that person the time back. But in terms of the content, it really isn't the property stuff that tends to connect. It tends to be, you have a lot of lurkers on LinkedIn as well. So for anyone who's posting regularly and not getting the results that they want, it doesn't necessarily happen overnight. What I tend to find now, when I get an inquiry dropping in my inbox and someone wants to jump on a call, it's pretty much, there's no sales call, there's no strategy call, there's no discovery call. It literally is just a chat. And usually the people that have been following me, the conversations tend to go, I've been watching you for the last 18 months. This particular post has really just grabbed me and I'm ready to work with you. They know who we are, they know what our values are, because I'd like to think I demonstrate them quite regularly through my content. And it's without sounding arrogant, it's pretty much a done deal. But it's not the property stuff. If you do a post that goes viral, I think the trick is to then follow it up whilst you've got eyes on your profile with not a spammy post, but just a post making it very clear what you do. So like a promotional post around fixed return investment in my case, that kind of thing. But again, there's clever ways of doing it. I think one of the best posts I had for onboarding, I had one post where we onboarded 10 clients just off of one post. I remember it. I think I put something like, boom, just acquired 10 off-market HMOs for our London-based investors. You can't get returns like this down south, ! No DM me, no anything, but the inbox just went nuts.
Wow. That's cool. I mean, this is the thing. It's funny how it's kind of the soft sell. You're not actually pushing anything, but it's there and it's pulling in the kind of the eyeballs and getting people looking at what you're doing. And you're offering, I mean, what do you offer in terms of the fixed return? It's as a percentage. I mean, because obviously interest rates now in the banks are kind of turning negative. So, it's an attractive thing to be able to offer fixed returns. What are you offering your investors?
Yeah, so it does depend on the amount of capital and the length of term, but it's up to 8%. And like you said, there's never been an easier time to raise finance. It's almost costing people money to keep their money in the bank. And so many people, we all work very hard for our money, and it's time to get that money working hard for you. These are asset-backed investments. No investments without risk, and you certainly can't guarantee anything in life other than death and taxes. But I tell you what, I'd far rather be, putting my money into something like this with tangible returns rather than rolling your dice on the stock market. And we also use a lot of, we're SaaS trustees as well, so we use a lot of pension funds to.
Okay, that makes sense. And do you put, investors into, jointly into investments, or is it standalone kind of?
Yeah, it's usually standalone. Although with our fixed return investors, obviously we've got the autonomy to do what we want, but we prefer to keep things very separate.
I'm sure investors do as well, because at least then they're not mixed in with somebody else. And so you're giving a fixed return, but the property is yours. You're just kind of taking the income from it and paying the fixed return, and then you're keeping the profit or whatever is left over. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So we either buy them to flip, or we're actually selling off quite a few. I mentioned the 20 properties that we added to our own portfolio. But the prices at the moment, it's we're not precious, we're not emotionally attached. This is a business for us at the end of the day. So we're actually offloading quite a few. So we either buy them, do them up to sell, at which point. If someone's just in deal specifically, would get their return then, or if not, that bit of profit would go back into the client account and wait until the end of the 24-month term or what have you was over. Or for the ones that we are keeping for our own portfolio, at the point of refinance, that's when you pay your investor back. So, but we always have multiple properties and contingencies and spreadsheets and God knows what else. I'll leave all that to my husband. My husband's a bit of a geek with all that kind of stuff.
You're obviously doing a lot of activity there. What does your team look like in terms of the different staff members that are supporting you and your husband?
Well, we've went around that. There's many ways to skin a cat, as you know yourself, having in property. We've had, I think we're on our, it's not that it's challenges. Within 3 years, we're now on our 5th project manager.
Wow.
We've had such bad experiences, unfortunately, with builders. We've had builders ripping us off. We've had builders pretty much abandon sites halfway through. Like, you could literally write a book. And I know that we're not alone with these experiences. And for me, as a business owner, one of our company values is we do what we say we're going to do. And very naively, up until 3 years ago, I've always been an employee. And I was so shocked. There is an upside to this, but because the majority of people don't do what they say they're going to do, which I was shocked by. When we do what we say we're going to do, people think we're like absolutely amazing. Whereas for me, that should just be a an absolute minimum requirement. But anyway, the reason I mention that is because we want to mitigate as many of those risks as we possibly can by bringing things in-house, which is why we went through the process of bringing in project managers. We now have an operations manager, and we have a project manager that sits underneath him. We've got a small team of marketing. There's 4 of us in marketing. We've got 3 on the admin side, and then we've got our trades as well. We've got painter and decorators, joiners, and what have you on the books. But as you know, it's a constant, it's a jigsaw puzzle, and as soon as you get one piece, there's another piece seems to go missing, and it's there's a lot of firefighting. It's definitely not without its challenges, but I'm very proud of the team and the culture that we're creating.
Yeah, it's. I mean, and it's also in just 3 years you've ramped up quite quickly. I'm impressed. I was going to ask you. I mean, so you did your property training, and 4 days later you had 2 properties purchased. And I mean, so that was you and your husband working by yourselves effectively. Mm-hmm. And then did you decide at that same time, okay, I must set up a LinkedIn account and must start, putting a time into that? Were you looking at all the social media channels, or were you just looking at LinkedIn? Like, what was the decision to go all in on LinkedIn?
Yeah, no, it was just LinkedIn, and I would advise anyone to master one platform. Now we're quite, we have quite an established brand, if you want to call it that, on Facebook, Instagram, and what have you. We've also launched the podcast, but it was primarily LinkedIn. But very interestingly, the intention for the social media and the brand presence is really changed over the last 3 years. I mentioned here, we're talking about the sort of content that resonates with people, and I also mentioned about, and I deliberately, I'm very open about the challenges that I've had over the years with depression and what have you, and the amount of people that, women in particular, that reach out to me to see that they take inspiration from my content. It's given them confidence. They feel like that. They felt really alone. It's just really empowered them to take the next step. And it may not necessarily be for a business venture. It may just be to do whatever.
Just fans of your kind of openness about your struggles and stuff. That's seems like
I mean the mindset. I mean, if without the right mindset, you're building your foundations on sand. Because I mean, Gavin, better than most what can go wrong in property, and things in business, they can really derail you. We almost lost our electrical business in 2016 when a national contractor went under owing us significant amounts of money, and it literally came down to the wire whether we could keep trading. And at the time, I was heavily pregnant. I was really unwell with the stress. They wouldn't let me out of hospital. It was just a horrible, horrible time. But there's a lot of lessons learned from those dark times. And I think anyone who's experienced those hardships and comes out the other end, almost got a bit of an obligation to kind of share that with people. Yes. And people get so much value from that. And actually, I've found through my public speaking, I do quite a lot of public speaking now, and it's never around property. It's always around the mindset. But the irony is the less I seem to talk about property, the more I attract investment. It might sound... it sounds woo-woo, doesn't it? But people really connect more on a human-to-human level. And talking about the social media, if you look at Richard Branson's personal following of several million compared to Virgin, which is only a few 100,000, or the same can be said with Elon Musk and Tesla. Yes. I think the way that we're all doing business is changing.
Yeah, the personal brand is so powerful compared to the corporate brand. And I mean, it's funny. I completely resonate with what you're saying there, because I mean, I'm involved in this business. We've built this big business park here, and there's a lot of credibility around working with these big, huge international companies and stuff. But it's only when I started sharing that my troubles with the 2008 crash, and when I ended up tens of millions in the red. That's when people are actually resonating. They're going, wow, it's really good that you're sharing this, because I'm struggling with, kind of hangover from that time and all this kind of stuff. So it's interesting how you're saying sharing things about, either depression or whatever it is really does resonate with people. And it seems to be far more attractive to them to kind of like follow somebody who's not doing the hard sell, invest in my business, give us money and we'll give you a fixed return. No, instead they find that that's a side that's actually just something else that they're attracted to about what you're saying and what you're kind of posting. It's interesting.
I fully agree. And before I started on this crazy entrepreneurial roller coaster, I was I used to get suckered into the mainstream media. I thought that the country was fucked, for pardon my French, but there was no money out there. We're all doomed, and it's just not been my experience at all. And I know when I started in property, I say 3 years. I mean, it might as well be a lifetime ago. You talk about your life before children. I kind of feel like that life before property was their life before property. But I always, as a lot of people do, put the person with the money on a bit of a pedestal, like they were the golden goose, and really not appreciating the value that we brought to the table. And actually, that's probably one of the most powerful lessons that we learned quite early on, that any transaction has to be a win-win for both parties, and that's whether we're buying a property, whether we're selling a property, whether we're whether we're raising investment. It doesn't matter. It's the same principle. There's no shortage of money out there, and there's no shortage of people that want to back you. We've got, my network is literally full of millionaires, decamillionaires. I've even got the odd billionaire there in there now. Whereas if you just said to Ellie McKay from 3 years ago, whenever I spoke to anyone that was, I don't know, probably earned more than £100,000, I was kind of like, oh my God, why are you even talking to me? I'm not worthy. And yeah, it's just really interesting. Again, where it sort of ties back into the mindset.
Yeah, but it's also, I think people appreciate a bit of being humble as well, and they like to work with somebody who's humble. Because one of the big pet hates that I have and that I rant about occasionally is this whole Instagram, lifestyle. Look at me, look at my watch, look at my car, and it's, all of that stuff. And I there's a couple of people who pop up in my feed sometimes, and it's, them staring at their new watch and stuff, and it's captured on the photograph perfectly. And I'm like, who is going to invest with somebody who's kind of like showing off their latest acquisition? Because it doesn't set the tone for being a good money manager. Do you know what I mean? It's not showing that you're humble, and it's not showing that it's showing that you're successful enough to have bought a fancy watch, but it doesn't really show you as being a good custodian of their investment. Whereas some of the posts that you're doing and being humble and stuff, I think does help a lot. I just want to go back a little bit. What you were saying earlier, that you treated it like a full-time job. So can you just, give us a little bit of behind the scenes kind of, yourself and your husband, you bought 2 properties within 4 days of the thing, and describe, what you were up to during that time in terms of, your activity on LinkedIn, because you can't post all day. What were you doing to kind of grow your profile other than posting? Is there stuff? Have you got any tips and kind of tactics that you can share with us to help for our own audience who's listening here today that might want to try and do the same?
It's quite interesting, actually, because you see what did I do on a day-to-day basis. I remember sitting in the office for the first time, with classic entrepreneur. You've got my laptop, hired an office, and all of this, and I'm like sat there and I'm like, right then, so what do I do? My husband's like, well, you're the boss. I'm like, but I'm used to being told what to do. There's always these systems, you type that and then it goes to that department and then this happens, and I'm like, I've got to create these systems. So it was kind of like that with LinkedIn. There was a lot of testing and measuring. And at the time I was probably posting 3 or 4 times a day, whereas now, I don't even post every day. And sometimes I'm a little bit slack with it, but you want to really dominate people's headspace. But interestingly, I've actually deleted quite a few of my best performing posts.
Why is that?
Because I've changed. I've changed and evolved a lot in the last 3 years.
And they don't resonate any longer, is it?
I don't resonate with it. I was a lot angrier. There was a lot of observational things about... it's that whole thing about blowing out somebody else's candle doesn't make yours any brighter. I think I was giving a bit of a running commentary on what I felt were, perhaps people operating unethically or what have you. But it's a dangerous place to be. If you're constantly focusing on the negatives, whether you perceive them to be right or wrong, it's you're not attracting the right kind of opportunities. And
yes.
I kind of realised if I'm being brutally honest here, I realised certain topics would always incite lots of comments, anything to do with Brexit or this, that, and the other. And
triggers.
A bit of clickbait. And it was genuine at the time. It was things I was genuinely passionate about or opinionated on. Whereas now I think I do evolve quite quickly, and I don't feel that they're a representation of how far I've come. And quite interestingly, somebody actually, they must have went back a long way, because I am quite prolific on social media. I put a post out and then somebody literally screenshotted a post from 2 years before, and it basically was contradicting it. I was like, well, you know what, I'm not a tree. I do change, I evolve, I grow, and this is where I'm at now, and shame on you if you're exactly the same as you were 2 years ago. But so in terms of the LinkedIn stuff, I mean, that wasn't all of the marketing I did. As I said about, the relationship element, I was getting around people from one of the other ways that we attracted a lot of investors was, rather than going to your, I don't mean this to sound derogatory, but some of your lower level networking events, which are fantastic and can provide quite a lot of value. But I was finding that you tended to find there was just all full of property sourcers or solicitors or finance brokers, whereas my avatar is typically people that are higher net worth. We don't really like to take on, there's exceptions to the rule, but we don't really want to take on investments less than sort of 100,000. So it was getting to the front of those rooms and getting on the stage and being that person of authority, and going to personal development events and making sure that when I did do that, and my bank balance, by the way, absolutely didn't reflect it at the time. There was a lot of this stuff was going on credit cards, but I would pay the premium to sit in the front row, like when Grant Cardone came over for the 10X tour in 2018. It was actually my property mentors, Paul and Billy, that brought him over. And I actually sat and had dinner, and Eleanor was sat at one side and me and Grant was sat at the other. And then we went out for lunch the next day. And I only paid, I think, $2,000 for that ticket, which I don't think it's a lot of money to have that kind of experience.
Wow.
At the Robert Kiyosaki event, front row there, I just through chatting, just through conversation, just like this, what do you do? Oh, I do property, blah, blah, blah. Picked up 3 investors, onboarded 3 investors off the back of it. So it wasn't exclusively LinkedIn. But I found that with LinkedIn, if you're in property, don't just go connect with a load of property people, because you're fishing in the same pond as everyone else.
Yeah.
Utilize Sales Navigator, because you can identify your avatar to a T, and then you can, so if it's a business, you can have say you're looking for business owners, you can target businesses that have a set amount of employees in it. Like Daniel Priestley talks about your desert phase, which we're in at the minute, and it's not a great place to be. He talks about if you've got less than 12 employees, it's like boutique, and it's quite fun. It's all growth. It's everyone knows everyone. You can go out for meals and what have you. When you get from sort of 13 to around the 35 market, it's quite a tricky phase, because you're not quite big enough to have like a finance manager and this manager and that manager, and you're still wearing quite a lot of hats, but you're too big to be small and too small to be big, to kind of be big. So in terms of the Sales Navigator, you would specifically look for employees of more than 40, and then target the business owners of and obviously you can do certain professions, certain industries. It's quite detailed. You can make lists on Sales Navigator as well, so that you can be strategic with your time rather than just scrolling through your news feed.
Yes.
When you're engaging specifically with people that are on your list. And there's something is pretty cheap, but I would recommend the listeners to possibly invest in. It's about $16 a month or something like that, called Shield Analytics. And it's just a really easy, digestible way to see, to analyze your posts, best performing posts and what have you. So that's a little tip. But really, I think more so than that, there's always hints and tips, but it comes down to the ability to write copy and to be able to connect. I don't necessarily know if that is a teachable skill, if I'm being honest with you. It's just...
Well, I've heard somebody talking about learning to copyright. There's a chap I follow in the US called Mike Dillard, and he, figured out how to copyright by taking sales copy that he thought was really, really good, and that kind of connected with him. And then what he would do is actually transcribe it exactly, And by doing that exercise over and over and over again with multiple kind of things, he actually said that he figured out the pattern that good sales copy follows. And it's, it's kind of the small sentences, it's like conversational, and he figured it out, and then he kind of started selling on that. And I know Nick James started out as a copywriter as well. And so it's interesting that what you've said there. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. I think if you can master the art of copy and you master the art of marketing, you're never going to go far wrong. It's interesting because we've never really ran paid ads. It's a bit of a bugbear of my mentors, and that's for the property side of things as well. That's actually acquiring the properties. It all tends to come through relationships and contacts on and offline.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, because I worked with Daniel Priestley. I did KPI, his brand accelerator. And he was saying that typically, I think they spend 9% or something like, or 5 to 9% of their annual revenues are spent on advertising. So it goes back into advertising, and you're not spending anything on that. That's interesting.
No, but for transparency, we spend a lot on marketing, just not necessarily on paid ads. We do put a lot of money behind the podcast, absolutely everything. But interestingly, we're about to trial some paid ads for LinkedIn. So I will let you know how that goes, Gavin, because a lot of people are very negative about LinkedIn ads. I think historically they've been quite clunky, whereas for me, I see that as an opportunity, because whilst everybody else is playing about on Facebook, that's leaving LinkedIn for me.
Yeah, I was just thinking that exactly, because I've tried to promote my podcast using Facebook on occasion, and it's kind of ridiculous because it's a real estate podcast. I talk about mindset and all that, and yet every time I try to do some sort of an advert on Facebook, it would come back, you cannot advertise in the residential property sector, as if I was selling property or something. And I was like, this is a podcast. And I had to change the wording of the ad in order, and you had to remove property, you had to remove real estate, you had to remove anything that was related to the property industry in order for it to actually be allowed to be. And I was just thinking, forget it, I'm not going to bother with this. Too much work. I was very interested in what you said about the fact that you used to pay to sit up the front at these events, because that's something that immediately resonated with a conversation I had in the previous podcast a week or two ago was with a chap here in Dublin called Joe Doyle. And Joe went to the 10X thing that Grant Cardone, and he paid to sit right up the front. And as a result of that, he had a meeting with Grant Cardone and all that kind of stuff. So you've done that a few times from what you've just said there. And have you found that to be really to open doors? It is a worthwhile investment, in your opinion?
Absolutely. We've onboarded clients off the back of it. Like I said, 3 just from the Robert Kiyosaki event. But another phenomenal way to attract, to build your brand and attract investment is to go down the podcasting route as well, because it's all about relationships. I find that people are a lot more open. We're all busy, especially now that the world's finally reopening. And if you were to, like, for example, I've got my first billionaire coming on my On a Mission podcast, Joe Fraser, the founder of Reebok.
Wow.
Whereas if I were to reach out to Joe and just say, can I come and pick your brains over Zoom for a coffee? He's going to say no. He's not got time to do that. But if you've got a podcast, people are just so much more open to sort of having that dialogue. And it's really interesting because for me, the podcast had absolutely nothing to do with property. It's not a property podcast. It's about mindset. It's about people who know what it takes to get to the top. So I've had like people like Ricky Hatton and Johnny Nelson on that are boxers. I've had Brian Babel, the ex-Liverpool player, and things like that, because the mindsets and the disciplines are very similar. But by default, and this was absolutely not the intention, I'm finding that people want to work with us. Some of my podcast guests are saying, right, you do property, can you build a portfolio, or I've got some capital sat in the bank. And it's just really interesting. The key is just getting around people. If you can get your message out on a one-to-many basis, whether that's public speaking, whether that's through your social media, whether that's through your podcasting, the more people out there that know your name, the more opportunities you've got to transact.
Yeah, it is. It's so true. That's really interesting and valuable. I wanted to ask, what's next for Ellie McKay? You're so busy now with all of the stuff that you got, 34,000 followers on LinkedIn. lots of property deals going on, and now you've got your podcast. What's on the horizon for you and your team? Like, what have you got? Anything that kind of excites you? Plans for the future?
Yeah, I mean, our latest business, you asked earlier about how we've been impacted by the pandemic, and certainly there was challenges on the property front as well, but overall we definitely capitalised on the opportunity. Our electrical business, however, we predominantly work with the sheltered housing providers, and had we just been relying on that one business, I don't think we'd be having the same conversation, because the business was kind of brought to its knees over the last 18 months. But off the back of that and the unfortunate disaster that happened with Grenfell, we have ended up launching a fire protection business just less than 12 months ago, which ironically is now far outperforming our electrical business. It's
Wow.
on to hopefully turn over some figures in its first 12 months. So there's quite a lot of exciting opportunity for there. I'm looking to fly the flag for women in construction and sort of be the face of that business and help with the PR and the promotional side of that. But my real passion lies with the podcasting, the connecting with people, and it's all based around the mindset. Always got a few little side hustles on the go. We're just creating a course around raising finance, which is going to be a little series of video modules discussing some sort of deep dive into the strategies around LinkedIn and some of the other ways that have allowed us to fund our property projects. So we're going to be doing that, and I'm also looking at setting up a bit of a Dragon's Den style course where we are going to encourage people we're going to deliver a couple of days of content around how to pitch and public speaking, how to present yourself. And then on the third day, I'm going to tap into my network and get some really exciting people, some of the top names in business from across the UK to join us on the panel and hopefully do a bit of business. So that's exciting as well.
That's exciting. It's exciting. Have you got any helpful resources or tools that that you use to kind of help either grow your expertise or your knowledge? I mean, are there any podcasts that you listen to, for example?
Yeah, I quite like the High Performance podcast with James Jake Humphrey.
Okay.
Also, one of my other guests that I had on my podcast, a guy called Dodge, he's got a podcast called The Eventful Entrepreneur, which is really interesting. And off the back of his podcast, it's funny how opportunities come about. Someone actually heard his podcast. The Next Thing ITV were in touch with him, and he is now a co-host on the Harry Redknapp show, which is quite crazy. But and I'm not a football fan at all, but I find it really interesting content. So yeah, I listen to Rob's Disruptive Entrepreneur, but yes. I'm continually. I'm a lifelong student. I'm continually investing in my own development, my own education. Some of the names you've mentioned, like Nick James, I'm in his 7-figure mastermind. I work with Rob Moore on his personal brand mastermind. I still work with my own property mentor, and they're very good friends of mine, Paul, up in Scotland. So yeah, continually learning. I mean, I'm 40 grand in just this year in terms of my own personal development. So
wow.
But every penny you get back tenfold, not just in terms of money in the bank, but the information and the experiences for me are priceless.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm constantly investing in myself. I've just signed up to a thing called Strategic Coach, which is a guy called Dan Sullivan, and I did KPI with Daniel Priestley, and I'm actually launching my own mastermind that's going to be kind of bringing people along the investment journey with me, kind of, I suppose, sort of in their corner, helping them sort of choose what the way they structure their deal and attract investors and stuff like that. Ellie, one of the final questions I always ask my guests, and now of course you're still a young lady, but what advice would you give to a young Ellie McKay who's starting out and knowing now what you know?
Oh, what a great question. I would suggest to everyone that I wish I'd got started earlier. I think it really is a case of just starting out and get perfect later. If you're going to wait for all your ducks to be in a row, that will never happen. The right time will never come. And whilst everyone was whittling about the Brexit, we went out and built a multi-million pound property portfolio. And I think just refuse to be judged by the limitations of others, because well-intentioned or otherwise, there's a lot of conventional wisdom out there. Be careful who you take your advice from, because for me, I take my financial advice off of multimillionaires, not my skint Auntie Sue that's telling me that the property market's saturated,
Yeah, that'll never work. And all this kind of stuff that you hear. Finally, Ellie, how do people, if people want to connect with you, obviously LinkedIn is going to be the way to do it, but what are the best ways to reach out and connect with you?
So LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, got a Facebook page, my On a Mission podcast, if I can give a little plug there. You will not find it difficult to find me, elliemckay.com website as well.
Okay, I'll put a couple of links in the show notes. Ellie, it's been a super pleasure, and thanks so much for your time today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Oh, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, Gavin. Thank you.
So that's it for episode 59 of Behind the Facade. Thank you so much for listening. As always, my number one ask is to leave a review or simply share the episode out with somebody you think might benefit from it. In the show notes, you'll find the various things discussed with Ellie today. And if you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover in future episodes, please connect with me via the Facebook group Behind the Facade Community. Alternatively, you will find me on social media using the handle Gavin J. Gallagher, and that goes for my YouTube channel, which I'm kind of active in these days, and so I'd like you to go over there and check it out as well. That's Gavin J. Gallagher. Lastly, you can stay up to date with my various events and challenges I'm working on, not to mention the new mastermind that is being launched in July. And so if you just want to get on any information on that, just please add your name to the email list, and you'll find that at www.gavinjgallagher.com/go. All right, folks, wish you a great week, and we'll speak to you again next week.